And we are live. Another wisdom podcast today with Mark Jeffrey. He's an executive producer at Voice America. Mark's a veteran broadcaster. He's worked at iHeartRadio for almost 40 years. So that's what he did of his career. He was the guy on the radio. Nowadays, he's also a podcast producer and a media specialist. He is an executive producer at Voice America. This pod is brought to you by podpire.com. If you want to start, scale, or be invited to a podcast like this one for insights, for lead gen, for clients, for building your community, and just being smarter. Mark will tell you about it. You learn tons from these conversations, these interviews, and they're pretty fun as well. So Mark, welcome to the pod. Can you tell us a bit more about yourself and what you do nowadays?
Sure, Charles. First of all, thanks a lot for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity. Quickly, my background. So I was born a long time ago in Providence, Rhode Island. When I was born, my father was on the radio at that moment. He had to leave his radio show on WPRO Providence, Rhode Island to witness the birth of his child. So when my father was at the hospital, being an old radio pro that he was in the mid-60s, one of those guys who used to talk like this back when the Beatles were coming out. Okay, he sounded like that. He did a live call-in from the hospital. Go, now for the very first time, here's my son, Mark Jeffrey. And he held up the camera and you could hear me crying in the background. So I started early. So my dad was in broadcasting my whole life. I decided to get into broadcasting when I got out of high school, went to the Connecticut School of Broadcasting so I could get a certificate, so I could get in the door. It was more about the piece of paper to get the entry rather than the knowledge they were going to pass on. To be quite honest, I learned a lot from my father and his broadcasting over the years. He did Pittsburgh Penguin hockey games, Pittsburgh Steeler games. He did a lot of broadcasting things when I was growing up. Anyway, fast forward, get out of high school. My first job, it's a telling story. I was offered two jobs, part-time at a rock station. I knew rock music, full-time at a country station. I didn't know country music at all. Said to my dad, I'm kind of up in the air. He said, you have to take the full-time job. And I said, but I don't know country music. He said, you need to go in there and mess everything up and learn it and just work at it. Okay. Because part-time, it'll take longer. Great advice. So whatever the door is open to you, walk in the door. So converted about a year later, opportunity came up to be an airborne traffic reporter. My dad had small airplanes when I was a kid, so I knew how to fly. My uncles were all cops, so I knew about police scanners, had those in my ear. So now I'm airborne. I was airborne for 20 years over Phoenix on multiple radio stations, told people where the fires were and the accidents and all that. I did that for a long time. 20 years in, I became a manager of traffic reporters while still being on the air myself. When I retired from iHeart this past December, I was in charge of 9 cities, covering 150 radio stations and their products. I was on a bunch of those stations myself. Along the way, I was also a party wedding DJ. I DJ'd about 300 weddings along the way. It's a side thing, but it ties into the branding, Charles, that I know that is an important topic to yourself and where you could go with that. And so I decided to walk away from, I did everything I wanted to do in radio, but I knew about podcasting. And so I had friends at Voice America. They said, Mark, you got to come over here. We could use your knowledge. There's podcasters who want to get started, and while they might be expert in their topic, what they're not expert in is how to start the show, how to keep the questions interesting, how to keep the flow going. And then how do you do this on a daily basis? And so now what I do, I'm an executive producer for voiceamerica.com. Basically, I'm a consultant for up and coming podcasters, and I'm having a lot of fun.
Love it. Hella background. That seems like a well-lived life. My question for you is, do you feel that sometimes walking in the same footsteps as your dad, you felt the pressure to accomplish more?
I did. It worked two ways, Charles. One, it was kind of scary going into his world. But two, I was having a difficult time in my first station finding my voice because I was trying to sound like a cool radio guy. And I wasn't finding my footing. And I had a conversation with my mother, and she said, you know, you do a dead-on impersonation of your father. Perhaps if you used a little bit of the broadcasting sound your father used, that would help you kind of jump ahead. So then I started talking like this, Charles, where I was just whipping things out just like my dad did and kind of chuckling and doing those things, which to me sounded it made me sound older than I really was. But I was 19 and in order to get a job, they look at you, you're a kid. What do you know? So it was difficult at first. And then it became a tremendous blessing to the point where in 1985, I got an offer to do airborne traffic for a radio station. I called my dad. He had just gotten an offer to do sports for the same station for 2 years. I worked on the same radio station on the same show that my dad did. So he did sports, I did traffic. We had a blast. So yes, there was pressure in the beginning, but pressure that I felt was important that I could live up to. And it was a benefit to me, Charles, because no other pressure in the world. And I've gotten up in front of 20,000 people and passed along messages at concerts and things like that. Didn't faze me at all. Why? Because I started my broadcast career with my father right there, and that was pressure. So it's been good and bad. But in the end, it was a blessing.
And most of what you did was live broadcasting. What tips do you have for folks going live like me and you today?
Well, one of the tricks is, since I knew for 40 straight years at 6:01 or 6:02 or 6:03 a.m. in the morning, Mark Jeffrey had to be live. And not only did I have to be live, I was the guy where the radio person would go, "Hey, Mark, what's going on in Phoenix?" And I had to know. So I couldn't just have walked into it. I have to know what's going on. One of the tricks I found, Charles, was in broadcasting, they tell you, all broadcasting schools tell you the same thing: be yourself. And it's true, but pick a version of yourself. This guy who's talking like this, I can do that anytime, night or day I want, where I'm elevated, I'm engaged, and I knew how to find that person, find that. I don't want to call it an act because it's really me, but it's me at my peak performance. Even when I was sick, dude, there was days I was sick. There's days I'd be flying in a plane and it's storming and I'm getting thrown everywhere. The audience doesn't care, but I still had to maintain that. So it's finding your voice so that every time you do a show, you're consistent. I think that's one of the key things, is to find that person that you want to be at your best.
So I'm guessing nowadays that flip switching is done automatically, effortlessly. But when you started, did you had any tips to flip that switch on?
Well, I was surrounded by a lot of good talent. One of the advantages I had was in the beginning, I would be a traffic person. I'd have a radio host, usually a co-host. I was on some of the biggest stations in Phoenix. So it was about me. I had no choice but to elevate my game. I mean, this was big time radio. The first station I was on here in Phoenix to do traffic, we had 750,000 listeners every morning. So I had no choice but to get there. And the people I worked with would remind me if my work was subpar or a little. I got a lot of tips along the way. So what I learned was how to craft the English language, how to speak in phrases. When I would do traffic reports, it isn't, "Wow, there is a lot of slow traffic on I-10 this morning through Phoenix." They don't have time for that. I-10 looks good through Phoenix. I-17 northbound fender bender at Indian School, move to the right. Hey, if you're on 7th Street. And so I would speak in phrases. So I got really good at speaking in short bursts. And it was one of those things that came to serve me well over the year.
How do you take feedback without being offended?
Well, it depends on where it's coming from. Now, I did take feedback. I've only been fired once in my whole life, Charles. It was my very first radio job because, and this is predating you, my first country station that I told you about, one of my jobs was I was music director. I was 19. I had a show and I was also music director. It was up to me about what music went on the air. I had a big say in it. In comes an album. Nobody ever heard of them. It was Alabama, a song called Mountain Music. Play me some mountain music. Ended up being a big hit, right? Well, the boss was on vacation. He said, don't put anything on the air till I get back. I heard this song and I thought, it's going to be a hit. I'm not even a country fan. This is going to be a hit. So I put it on the radio and had all the other DJs on the station play the song. Boss comes back. We got into words. And so it was one of those things where I should have sat back and listened to what he said while I disagreed with his points about why it wasn't going to be a hit, because I was right. I had to learn what authority meant. And then that's from there on, it was a thing about listening to the messages I was getting about how I can improve my craft. And because while some of their messaging might have been wrong, all the various bosses I had, what nuggets can I pull out of it? How can I get better? And also, to be honest with you, I worked very, very hard. So I tried to eliminate the need for me to have constant coaching, if you will. I would go to my boss and we'd have meetings. "Mark, what are you working on?" I go, "Well, I'm reading this book. And I've also been listening to some of my air checks of past traffic reports I've done because I've found that I do this or that." I would do preemptive coaching to myself. And so the boss would say, okay, Mark's on it. He's trying to become better. So there's not a lot I left for the bosses to do, if you know what I mean.
So what tips would you have for me and my podcast, whether it's in terms of preparation, my interviewing style that's really laid back? Any feedback for me?
Yeah, well, one of the things I would do in broad strokes, Charles, is I keep notebooks because I always have, but I also use my phone. Anything at all that occurs to you, and it should quite often, about your show or a question or a guest, you should constantly be thinking of things and get it out of your head. It's like, you know who I should have on as a guest? Perhaps you're just taking out the trash. I should have this person. Well, do it. Say it into your phone. Get that out of your head and collect all those. I have 2 full notebooks here full of all kinds. You can't see them because of the blur, but trust me, I've got 2 full notebooks and another one over there of all the podcasting ideas that have ever occurred to me. And these are in my phone, but by writing it, the reason I write things out is because it makes it stick in my brain easier, which is an old psychological trick. I might be different for people today that you just say it into your phone, but writing it out for me puts it into my brain. So one of the things I would say, Charles, is collect all those ideas. The other thing is you want to do a review of your work on a regular basis. Go back and listen and going, okay, that was good. That was good. I didn't need to ask that question there. It slowed down the conversation. You should also, I would say, whatever topic or whatever thrust you're trying to do with your show, you should be able to tell me the top 5 people that either you want to emulate or be like. Some people go, I'm going to be myself, man. Okay, but who are the 5 people who dominate in whatever it is, whatever angle you're going to go in? A general podcast, a hi, how are you question and answer thing, or maybe it's specifically about AI or, specifically about growing your business leads, those sorts of things. You should know the top 5 in those and listen to them, follow them, and mimic what they do. Pull from the best.
Right. I definitely know the 5, the hand podcasters that I want to emulate and so forth. I also take constant notes. So doing that for sure. Question for you. How should I interview someone that's starting, let's say it's their first podcast, via someone that's 1,000 podcasts deep? How should my interviewing style change with them?
Well, you're going to have to help along the first person who doesn't have a lot of experience. You're going to have to guide them along about, hey, why don't you introduce yourself and give us a little bit of your background? From that very first question, Charles, you're going to get a sense of where they are in their communication ability. Because here's the thing, if you want to be a good podcaster, one of the top 3 needs is communication skills. And it doesn't mean that, you are the best enunciator. Can you get your point across? And then, of course, after that, do you know what it's like to be a branded individual? I've been branded since 1982, before the internet and everything, but I had to protect my brand. You didn't find me in bars at 2 a.m. because I couldn't afford to, because if somehow my name was in the paper or something and I'm in this dicey situation, my career could be over. So you got to protect your brand, and you're always thinking, is this good for my brand if I'm doing something publicly? And you also, number 3, have to be a curious person. And so as you're talking to that new person, you're making that determination. Are they just talking about themselves, or are they curious about the conversation they're having with you? And then that'll tell you a lot about how you go on. Now, if you're talking to somebody who's an expert, then you can just dive right into, what it is that they did along the way. What books did they read? How did they get started? And those sorts of things.
Because yesterday I had the pod friend come on again, and basically he is promoting his book, and it was a 1-hour monologue, but it was very good. It was like a masterclass. So I just shut up and listened. I never do that usually. When it comes to famous folks that come on my pod, my goal is to interrupt their patterns, because these guys, they're just like machine, and they say the same message over and over again. So boring. Like, I already heard your stuff, dude. Like, change disc. So my goal with them is to sometimes interrupt them, right? Because they're not used to being interrupted. They're like always the king walking in the court. And also ask questions that they don't get asked before. I have a question for you, though. I heard you say about the brand. Me, I tend to be on the other side of that. If I'm going to be canceled, I'm going to be canceled. And I mean, I won't do like stuff that's not aligned with my values, like getting drunk and doing stupid shit, but I say a lot of things, and I say my opinion and I'm not scared of it.
Yeah.
If I say dumb stuff, I exactly want folks to tell me like, look, Charles, this is dumb. We society do not agree with that. And that's how I will reason and potentially change. So I'm kind of this loose cannon. What do you think about my strategy? It's sort of Elon Musk style.
No, I love it because you own it. Okay. So since you're ready, it's like, hey, Charles, if you're going to do that, there is some downside, and that's fine. If you're ready for it, that's cool. But some people aren't. So when I started and I was part of a giant radio station and a corporation and part of a radio show or multiple shows, I was just a piece. So I couldn't make the bigger look bad. But as I went along and the brand was just about me, I only had to worry about me. And I don't care at this point, because of my age and what I've done, really don't care what people think about me. I really
Right.
don't, which has a lot more to do with the fact that I've studied the Stoics and Marcus Aurelius meditations more than, reading sales books or how to be a manager or anything. It's just that it's not up to us to worry about what other people think of us. And
Yeah.
so I think it's great that you understand it. You made a statement there, Charles, where you understood, hey, here's where I am, and I'm going to say what I say. And if I get canceled, so be it. The fact that you know that tells me everything. And that's a good way to be.
Thank you for that. I think Stoic philosophy is how we got connected in the first place. I published a pod with a guy that spoke about Stoicism and control what you can control. Now, with the cancel movements nowadays, it's not only that I'm opposed to woke and opposing freedom of speech and shutting people up. That's not how you advance a conversation. It's just by growing out of a conversation. I'll never be ready for the hordes of folks that will try to cancel me. That is the truth, But I value honesty pretty much over everything else. I value freedom of speech quite a lot, which is why I want to register some of my business in Dubai, but not necessarily want to live there, because I want to be able to say whatever I want to say so that I can keep on growing. Last question I have for you is, you've worked at an amazing company for 40 years, iHeartRadio. You saw it grow to immense proportions.
Immense.
How did that happen, and what lessons have you derived off that?
Well, I think one of the big ones, okay, so backing up, I worked for a couple of radio stations in the 80s and 90s, late 80s, that the radio group I worked for, there was 3 stations here in Phoenix, were bought by Clear Channel Communications. And then after that, Clear Channel was bought by the bigger iHeart. And now iHeart, one of the things they were brilliant at early on was the iHeart logo. And they thought, we have to think outside of the box. We're not just radio, because they saw the end coming for traditional. You turn on the radio in your car or you have it on your boom box. They knew that was ending. All of us in radio did. So they were smart, going, we're going to be iHeart. They bought facilities, or their concert venues. They bought those. They bought advertising and marketing firms and brought them in. They wanted to be the largest podcaster in the world. They said it. We had the content because we had 850 radio stations, and on each station, somebody's doing a show, or there's multiple shows. Each daily show's a podcast in itself. So they had the content, and they just needed more. And how do we do it? So they bought How Stuff Works. And so they brought those people in, realized they're the experts at it. Okay. They were the early experts at podcasting. So we could either beat them, or why don't we merge with them? And so they combined those. And so the thing that jumped out to me about iHeart is, rather than reinventing the wheel, they found people that were very skilled at what they wanted to do, and either brought those people in and outbid where they were working, offered them more money, or just simply bought the company and brought in all the expertise and intellectual property. So I think the way they tried to stay ahead of a lot of other radio groups that are still stuck in, there's a radio tower on that mountain and people turn their radio on in the morning, those numbers are going down and down and down, because all of our attention is split in so many directions. When I was a kid, everybody listened to the radio at night. Now people don't. They're streaming and so many things. So I'd say the big thing with iHeart is their innovation, and they never sat still. They were never satisfied. Little tricky, because you'd be judged on a regular basis, and as a performer you got reviewed on a regular basis because they had high standards, but never being satisfied.
Yeah, I had Sirius come with my new cars that I bought, and I also listened to Sirius on my phone afterwards. Why? Because they did a really good job. They had the best chill channel, sort of EDM. So I still listen to that. And Sirius was started by one of my favorite entrepreneur, Martine Roblat.
Yeah.
And yeah, she's just like trendsetter, amazing person. Want to ask you, that is my very last question. What do you do nowadays with Voice America, and how are you continuing your career with everything that you learned at iHeart, but for podcasting now?
Well, what I do with it's voiceamerica.com. And I wasn't going to do anything, Charles. I put myself in a position because I wasn't silly with my money. I read Tony Robbins' Master the Game of Money, basically, and Warren Buffett, been a disciple of his. So along the way, it's like I always lived below my means. That's just general advice I'll give to everybody, seriously, because most all the people listening to this are probably younger than me. Anyway, live below your means. Okay. So I put my money away. So then I had options. I hit 60. What am I going to do now? Only what I want to do. And so Voice America is here in Phoenix. It's a mom and pop organization. They brought me on board. I talked to the general manager here, and he described what the job would be like. So what I do is, whether it's accountants or people who do energy healing or whatever it is, I help people who are expert in a particular field, but need to learn how to do a 1-hour radio show once a week. So what my job is like, okay, so when you're going to start your show, it's going to start at 2 minutes after the hour. We're going to script out your first 2 sentences. I want them to be the same all the time. So you're comfortable, you're getting into your speech pattern. And then later on down the road, a couple of months down the road, you won't need that little speech. And then there's a commercial break at the quarter hour. How do I get in it? Because you're talking to an interesting guest. And then oftentimes people stumble to go into their breaks. I also tell them, I want benchmarks. I want something that every week is a little bit different. What's your tip of the week, your book of the week, your joke of the week, your innovative product of the week? I want something that's a little nugget, a short, as they call it now. But in radio, we used to call them benchmarks, a little 1 or 2 minute segment that could be pulled out of your show. And there's another short that you can use that's related to your topic, but separate. So I go over all those things with them in a much more relaxed manner, by the way, Charles, because these people are getting freaked out about, wow, how many people are listening? Well, sometimes 100,000, 200,000, it depends. We have over 1 million listeners. And so I try not to tell them those things because they'll get freaked out. So part of my job also is to get them to relax and find their messaging. And then I'll do pretend shows, mock shows with them to going, okay, that was good. Let's try it again. Let's relax a little bit. So basically I coach and consult brand new podcasters, which is fun because I'm talking to intelligent people who are good in their areas. Some of them have multiple letters after their name. I got a show coming on with a professor at Drexel University, super intelligent lady, but she doesn't know how to do a radio show. She's not even sure what mic she should use. She's not, what, Mark, do I wear headphones or should I let the speaker go through the computer? The things, Charles, go, no, let's get earbuds for you, because if this computer speaker volume and all the rest of it. So I'm enjoying that aspect of helping people that are just starting their kind of podcasting careers, if you will.
Love it. And where can we find out more about you?
You go to voiceamerica.com. On the about page, the drop down, there's a picture of me, Mark Jeffrey. Love to hear from anybody who's got questions. Even if you don't want to do a podcast, if you have questions about, hey, Mark, what do you think of Joe Rogan's work? What do you think of Lex Friedman's work and things like that? Because those are guys I'm big fans of. I watch them because, I think Joe's the master podcaster. So be happy to answer any questions from anybody, Charles, because I'm at that stage. I'm an old sage, as my wife calls me sometimes. So now I'm here to impart knowledge to anybody who wants it.
Love it. And I'm Charles Cormier, your host. If you want to start, scale, or be featured on